Yeah.
Are we on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Am I on? Is this mic on? We good? Excellent. Welcome. Welcome to the August 26, 2024 study session of the Stillwater City Council. I will call this meeting to order, and this is a little bit of a different format for us. We're doing a study session tonight. As you see from the agenda, a study session of the council to discuss, consider, and provide possible direction to staff on long-term strategic planning for the parks and community resources of the city of Stillwater. And there's a whole lot of stuff underneath that we're going to talk about tonight, but this is a little bit of a more informal setting. It's a little odd to have our audience off to the side, but we'll get used to it. I do have some folks who have signed up to speak tonight. I think maybe some people are going to wait and see what they hear. We'll ask you when we come to a public comment period if there are other folks that want to speak. We certainly want to hear from anyone that has comments. But the point of tonight is, as it says on the agenda, no action will be taken. The point really is for us to just kind of hear about what's happening with some of these assets and some of these resources, hear about what staff has been working on. I know we've got a subcommittee of the council that's been looking at some of this stuff, and have a real study session and discussion about it. So I'll pass it over to Christy Driscoll to get us kicked off.
Thank you very much. Assistant City Manager Christy Driscoll. I'll be tag teaming tonight with our Parks and Community Resources Director, Barbara Bliss. So as we get started, we have a lot of ground to cover tonight. I want to give you a quick overview. We'll be talking about the park system, the previously commissioned Park and Community Resources Master Plan, staffing and maintenance concerns, an inventory of our properties, information updates, and options for moving the system forward for our community. Partnerships have been embraced by the city with great success to provide programs, facilities, and services to our community. As you can see, our system is more than just parks and playgrounds. As we move through the pieces this evening, we need to keep in mind that a path forward encompasses many areas and that they must be viewed together when determining priorities, staffing, and funding, all of which are limited resources. This evening, we must also think about the amenities located within our parks that are not listed separately. Playground structures, skate park, dog park, sports courts, park walking trails, disc golf, picnic areas, and more. Here you can see a partial timeline of the master plan, beginning with the allocation of $185,000 to commission the plan in 2021. In your packets and online, you will find the associated budget revision for the plan with more information. A kickoff meeting was held in June 2021, and presentation of the draft plan occurred at a 2022 study session. The Park and Community Resources Master Plan was not adopted and is included tonight and referenced this evening as a draft resource. As the mayor mentioned, there was a subcommittee created. That subcommittee has met several times this year. I'm going to speak mainly for 2024 and forward due to some staff reorganizations that we've had. But we did have met several times this year, and we're here tonight to update everyone and move the conversation continually forward. At the beginning of 2024, we did start focusing more on these community assets and began to dig into maintenance concerns. We have been taking the last several months to better track expenses, identify staffing priorities, and try to determine the best path forward with a thoughtful review of the parks system and community needs. The sheer volume of properties and amenities that are city-owned, staffed, and maintained is daunting. It is difficult to prioritize funding and staffing so that all receive the care needed for true public enjoyment. This concern is heightened by new items coming online, Block 34, Rails to Trails, and Washington School, which will all require attention, focus, future use determinations, and dollars. Prioritization must occur for the largest impact to the community and the users. The purpose of tonight is to allow for an open conversation regarding next steps for our park system, community needs, and that prioritization previously mentioned. The draft master plan is discussed this evening to understand one of the reference materials available, remind or advise all of actions previously taken, and to discuss the contents of the plan. I'll provide a brief overview of information that we may wish to reference this evening, and in the next slide, we will broadly cover recommendations of the plan. This is a 183 plus page document broken into sections as noted on the slides. Some important information is this report shows that there are 817 areas of parks. This equates to nearly 17 acres per 1,000 residents. The national average is 9.9. This 817 acres does not include Lakeside Golf, which consists of an additional 160 acres, Lake McMurtry, which is over 1,000 acres of water surface area, but includes 35 miles of multi-use trails and also includes 2 18-hole disc golf courses. Also not reflected are the 100 acres of Botanic Gardens, the beautiful OSU campus, or Meridian's walking trail. As you can see, the large number of green spaces that we do have, but we do not have currently the staff or funding devoted to it to support those places. Community input was obtained by a consultant, including a kickoff meeting with stakeholders, as well as an open house. The online survey generated 781 responses at the time, and this was a great response rate for a survey focused solely on park system for a community our size. For context, we have received 550 responses as of August 12th for the comprehensive plan. A reminder that experts from Vibrant Community recommended a survey our size, a representation of 500 responses is a good number. As we move through the plan, you can find goals of the master plan on page 9, key trends and best practices in recreation on pages 22 and 23, and the existing inventory begins on page 26. Each park and amenity is listed with park information, priority needs, improvements, and for some, liquidation recommendations. To continue, we'll touch on overall considerations from the draft master plan. A recommendation for reduction in parks and consolidations of amenities to reduce maintenance and operational costs of the system and to fund improvements to highly used and highly valued parks is located on page 120. Specific parks are listed for potential liquidation. The Senior Center and Community Center listed for facility consolidation, as well as acquisition needs are also included. Section 6 details community and system-wide recommendations for consolidation, reduction, and additions to the park system. For future recommendations, those are located on page 149. They include programs, recreation facilities, staffing and operations, maintenance plans and procedures, natural wildflower areas, public education, playgrounds, adoptive park, program, and marketing. You can find funding strategies located on page 166, and an action plan begins on page 173. The action plan and the draft master plan identify key priorities to improve the park system with administration operations recommendations and facility recommendations. Again, the previously referenced individual park recommendations for needs and priorities are listed by item in section 3, beginning on page 26. I'm going to hand our speaking points over to Ms. Barb as we move forward.
Thank you, Christy. Barbara Bliss, Director of Parks and Community Resources. The inventory that the master plan did listed all of our park land and our facilities. Many parks would be categorized as typically very small parks with no designated parking, so it's all off-street parking. Neighborhood parks, you can get to them within a half-a-mile radius, so it lists all the neighborhood parks up there. The community parks, which is where a lot of our ball fields are located, so they do get a lot of usage all during early spring to late fall. SAS is just getting ready to start a fall program with over 90 flag football, adult softball, and baseball teams, so those parks are utilized quite heavily. Metropolitan parks, our Beaver Lake and Sanborn, those are known, typically they have great natural areas and they bring in visitors from out of town. And then the facilities that we maintain, the Army Recreation Center on 9th Street, Curry Arts Center, the community center, which we're sitting in, the senior center, and then of course the municipal pool, and we take care of the Cameo Trail. There is also a lot of park-like land out there that we do not control, but which we often list in all of our information, just so people know that, hey, there's other places that we can go utilize, such as the walking trail, Meridian Tech, the Botanical Gardens, and places such as Oklahoma State on campus, and Stillwater schools, especially their playgrounds. Now, we've already done some reorganizing within our department. And this year, one of the things we've done is taken money from Public Works, which I'm sure they were thrilled about, and put it into our department. It's $125,000, and all that does is allows us to track what types of maintenance we're doing within the parks and facilities under Parks and Community Resources, so we can keep track of where we're spending the majority of our money. And that's just in maintenance. That's not doing any new facilities at any of our places. That's just pretty much maintaining what we have. We have 3 dedicated employees right now who work out of Public Works, but they do most of our maintenance and repairs in the park system. So we are tracking their staff hours to determine where they're putting in the majority of their workday. And right now I can tell you most of it's mowing. So that's one of the things we'll discuss also. We are increasing the parks maintenance staff. Christy has worked extremely hard with Christy, our finance director, and they've come up with some additional funding for us to hire 2 part-time employees who will work year-round, and we'll work with our 3 full-time employees to work in the parks and work in our facilities. So they will be able to do some of the things that right now we can't get to, and ordinarily we may have to bid out and get some outside contractors, but they can hopefully do some of these facility and park maintenance improvements in-house.
Can you give us an example of that?
Well, we'd like to do a lot of painting this fall, and right now, we would have to bid all that out if we go ahead and paint all of our facilities in the park, such as our bathrooms, which need a desperate overhaul, as well as our pavilions. So if we had that extra manpower, we think we could do that in-house. We are in the process of hiring a Block 34 programmer, so that person will be in charge of bringing all of the programming into Block 34. They'll be housed here in this facility, and they will work directly under Stephanie Kidner. So that, hopefully next week, we'll put that out and start receiving applications for that position. We'll review all of our operations, facilities, and services offered. We'll look and see what we do well, what we do not do well, and what we think the people of Stillwater want us to do based upon their feedback. We've also reorganized our current staff. So I have Jim Scott, who works under me. He does all of the parks and maintenance. He's basically the manager of parks and maintenance. And then Stephanie, who's here at the community center, she does all of our programming. So she will be not only working at the community center, but she'll be in charge of the senior center and the Block 34 position, as well as the community center. So we've also reorganized the people. So Stephanie, who is having some increased responsibilities, God bless you, will get some additional help. So we've moved some of our people around and taken some of the load off of Stephanie, so that she can do some of these new requirements of her job. And we also completed a pool inspection, which I think a lot of you have seen. We were not able to open Couch Park Pool this year. We knew it would cost a lot of money to get it ready, and we're not sure, even if we did all of the repairs we knew needed to be done, that it would stay open this summer. We weren't sure it would hold water for any long period of time. So we did have a company come in who builds most of the swimming pools in the Oklahoma area for commercial use. And they determined probably around at least $180,000 to get the pool, just to get it to where we meet all the requirements legally. Even with the amount of maintenance that we would do and fixing the pool, they know there's a lot of concrete work underneath they were not able to look at. They're still not sure that $180,000 would get us going and keep the pool open for any length of time. So pools are very, very expensive. And I'm gonna let you jump in since you've had some discussions with the YMCA.
So the pool report attached was extremely comprehensive. They identified structural safety concerns with the drainage and were cautionary to us about the potential for injury. So even if the pool was able to keep water, it was concerned with the turnover rate due to the pump structures, the drain standards based on when it was built and maintained. And so you can see there's some very large numbers. Barb mentioned the 180,000. They found it to need significant repairs, and they said to address all of the issues, their true range would be around that 1.5 million for the large pool and around 300,000 for the kids pool, just to address all of the safety structure concerns that were present. And so I know there was a lot of discussion about why the decision to close the park, and it was just safety concerns and the ability to get it through the season. We have been in conversations with the Y, which we're very excited about. As I mentioned, public-private partnerships and are very well suited to this community. We've seen some success. These conversations with the Y are related to a model not seen before in Stillwater. So the discussion in previous years has been that the Y ran or operated with staffing of the lifeguards and the hours and all of that at the Couch Park pool. This year, they offered to open their pool for community access. This would be a model where it was more of a true partnership to offer a true community pool in their book of business as the experts in that recreation field. So we're early in on those discussions and hopeful about where that could lead us as a community for the best impact and availability and accessibility, and not have to address some of the concerns with a pool that potentially has outlasted its lifespan.
Thank you, Christy. The pool was built in 1974, so it's 50 years old, which is young compared to some of the other pools in the state of Oklahoma that were built during the WPA projects. But those are still going strong, just like our armory, which is a beautiful facility and we can still use for recreation program. Again, at the pool, even if we had the money to fix it up and get it running this past summer, it did not have a slide. We had to take all those down because they were no longer safe for the public to play on. It no longer has a diving board. So basically, it's a hole in the ground, a big hole in the ground. 400,000 gallons of water is what it holds. But it doesn't have some of the attractive amenities a lot of the other pools in the area have. Recently, when we had our staff do our playground inspections, we found that Arrowhead Park, which had playground equipment, the equipment was unsafe. It had been vandalized, it was falling apart, it was rusting out, it had numerous problems. And our inspector could not approve it for further use as a playground. So Arrowhead Park, on Arrowhead Street, right behind campus. It's kind of a hidden park, one of those neighborhood parks in the Westwood area, if you're not familiar with it, and Christie's put the map up there. So this was an opportunity for us to find out what the people who use that park, what they would like to see go back into the park. Is it a playground? Is it something else? So we put up signage with QR codes at the park, and we got a wonderful response. My gosh, the first couple days. And then last week, we went door to door in the entire neighborhood and put up the same flyers. So we tried really to gravitate towards those people that live right in that area and utilize that park. We didn't want to hear from the entire town of Stillwater because a lot of people don't even know where this park is. So we wanted to focus on the people in that area who actually use the park. And I think we had 57 responses last time I looked. And the majority of the responses, first of all, 40% of the people who filled out our online survey were in the 60 plus category, which kind of makes sense, the Westwood area. But also coming up next, 25% was the 18 to 24 year olds. And that is all the rentals in the area. So you have a mixture of those people that live there forever in the Westwood area and then all the rental housing. But by far the largest response of what they wanted to see at that park were picnic tables and benches, shade structures, areas for their dog to run loose, hopefully not, they'll use the leashes, but they wanted open green space. There were a few people that were sad the playground equipment had been taken down, but we do have another playground just 0.6 of a mile away in Ingham Park, and then even closer, 0.4 of a mile away is the Westwood Schools. So they could utilize that playground equipment immediately. So by far, it looks like people want to enjoy that space. They said they would really like to have picnics there. They'd like to sit in the shade and just relax. And that was even the college students. So I think the next popular response was, which didn't make sense in this area, pickleball courts. The ever popular pickleball courts.
So what we're taking from that data is that as we locate some of these in this branch effort to reach our community members at the parks and at the community spaces that they are using and enjoying, is that you are still going to provide us with information as to what you want to see for the entire park system. And so we appreciated all of the candid responses. And this was a moment for us that kind of confirmed what our hope was, is one, that we would have that area participate, and you did participate, and we're very appreciative of that. And we took down a playground structure, and we wanted to be intentional and pause. Because what we want to do is make sure that we are capturing the needs and the current wants of those areas. Is there still the need for a playground structure in this? And our responses from those who were in the area utilizing that is no, our dynamics have changed since that structure went in. And so this is part of our reach out to reach our community members where they live, work, and play, and how they utilize it, the frequency, what changes we've seen since the original structures went in. And instead of just duplicating exactly what we had there before, is let's ask our residents what they really want out of the assets that we have for the community. And also with the pickleball responses, we joke, but we can capture system-wide data even with these individual surveys, because while that answer may not be the ideal location, we can still see that that is very definitely a need did this community want? So we are appreciative of that support that we received in the survey.
Right now, we've gone back into Arrowhead, after we removed the equipment and put sod down, so we're growing the grass, getting it prepared for whatever we decide goes in there next, but it looks like if the responses continue in this direction, we'll look at doing what the public has requested for that area, so. And that may mean we have to now have trash service, which we have not had at Arrowhead. We'll probably definitely need that. We'll need our doggy mutt mitts, so if they take their dogs to that area, they can dispose of the waste. But we'd like to make sure that we do have what the people in that area really want in the Arrowhead Park. Probably the next item we'll look at, Myers Park. We're having some similar issues. Needs $30,000 to $35,000 worth of turf replacement. So we'll have to determine what to do with Myers Park. It's a beautiful area with the creek going through it. There were some suggestions in the master plan, which I pull out weekly and look at and try to utilize a lot of their suggestions. So, but that'll probably be one of the neighborhood parks we look at next.
And I do want to address some of the concerns that everybody has voiced as we walk through this about the liquidation of certain parks or parklands. Again, it goes back to a little bit of my 817 acres statement that I made earlier that is significant and daunting for us to maintain, staff, and fund. That is part of our intentional approach to this, is to truly look at there are certain parks, playground structures, et cetera, that have increased liability and cost to maintain. And so we're not only looking at right-sizing potential acreage of land, but also right-sizing the equipment. And so there are multiple ways that we can make reductions and savings in how we approach this. And we understand that nobody wants anything removed or to lose an asset. But honestly, there are going to be some conversations in the future for council where we are presenting potential consolidation and liquidation. And that is just so that we can make sure that what we present to the public is a safe and welcoming spot that is attractive for people to use. And so that is where the liquidation comments come in, is that there may be times that we do recommend different areas or assets to be liquidated so that we can better fund larger parks or different park areas to make sure we don't have a duplication of services or equipment and amenities right next to each other. So as we go through the conversation, I know that there were some concerns whenever we say liquidation, and we know that these assets and amenities, people are very prideful that they have them in their areas or that they use them, and they can be very near and dear. But our goal is truly a park system community-wide that does allow us to have some locations such as pickleball. We know that some parks are going to have a different prioritization, and that's just part of the conversation so that we can ensure all are safe and enjoyable and maintainable. So I think as we go through, Barb and I would like to stop talking now and just be available for council to ask any questions. We're very appreciative of our audience's time tonight, as well as council and staff. We do have some questions that we can kick off if you would like to use in order to facilitate the conversation. So it's obvious to us that great steps must be taken to address the future of our park system. And without adoption of that master plan or a new direction being provided by council, we kind of feel like we are not being efficient for our citizens and the community. Staff is a little bit we're not happy with this current status of our park system either. So we'd like to have a conversation with council so that we can ensure that we are fulfilling the priorities of council in how we staff and how we fund and how we approach this situation over the next little bit. We've taken a lot of steps in 2024 to get a handle on some budgeting, what that looks like during the different seasons of staff and needs for the community, at different seasons of park users and how that staffing looks. Barb mentioned we're adding this part-time. We're trying to do that for some immediate impact. We're tracking hours, we're tracking the gap, and we're also looking at the current level of funding we know is not enough. but it's a question of where does additional funding come from when you look at our city services and those general accounts. And we just need to have some direction so that we can move it forward in a way that's best for our community. So appreciate your time.
Thank you, Christy and Barbara. I think what I want to do first, I think, is probably open the floor. If anybody has particular concerns about that. I would like to hear community comments to what you've heard so far. Just as a kind of a follow-up quickly though, before we do that, the staff's questions, one of my things I wrote down there was, what are your biggest questions that can be answered? You put out there, should we adopt a plan? Help me with some of the more specific questions that you're trying to answer that the master plan would help answer for you, or that would give staff, where do you need direction that the plan would give you direction on? And I know you were mentioning staffing, but what are some of the other decisions that you're trying to make that you need a plan to help you with?
The master plan, we understand there were some concerns with the master plan when it was originally presented. It grabs a very good inventory. They prioritized things in high, medium, and low, but their priority was based on some security or safety aspects and not necessarily immediate needs. And so we like with the direction of that plan, we believe it provides that authority from council that says we acknowledge that potential liquidation is necessary. There is the conversations for some consolidation. There are things that we need to pursue in additions to our parks, sports courts, pickleball, etc. We think that with that master plan, and it's with or without modifications was our question, because what we would do is use it as a guidelines that says, yes, we accept some of the facts are true in here, and we'd like to really use this next period where staff is intentional, like we were doing with Arrowhead Park, and including our community more now to see what we can move as a path forward. But that master plan just really takes that work that that consultant does and that original community input and allows us to look at some of the statistics that they provided for well used, or potentially this is an area that this park could be improved. Look at this roadway going through this park, and that's not the best location for a roadway splitting a park, as Southern Woods is the example. And take some of those and understand that we're all kind of on that same path of using that as data and analytics to get us to actual true action paths forward.
Maybe before we go to comment, I don't know if the counselors who helped serve on the committee at this point want to maybe just give kind of an update on some of the discussions that you all have had as a committee, or some of the questions that you've been trying to deal with in that time frame. Vice Mayor, I know you were on that. Councilor Clark served as that subcommittee. Not necessarily the full thing, but maybe some of the questions or comments that you all tried to wrestle with in your meetings.
Sure. I think one thing that maybe bears mentioning is just the fact that we don't currently have, right, a full-fledged Parks and Recreation department in our community. That was a decision that was made with previous leadership at the city. I'm not sure, Barb, you probably know exactly how long ago that was.
Around 11 years.
Yeah, so starting 11 years ago, our community has been working diligently, but without a designated department. And I think that was one of the things that struck me when this master plan was originally presented to us was there's, a lot of implications and a lot of discussion. And when we start talking about, the maintenance and the condition of parks and the potential for things like liquidation, I think one of the first questions that Councilor Clark and I had was like, what are we spending on our parks right now? And what does that look like? And what does our maintenance plan look like? And so really those were a lot of the first questions that we asked staff to evaluate.
It actually took quite a while to get an answer to that question because it was spread out all over the place in the budget and it wasn't consolidated anywhere. And it took a long time to get to what are we spending, and we still don't, I don't think, have a real number. But I think we're a lot closer than we were 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge part, I think, in the decision-making process to understand you know, how much of our budget is actually going to parks, how much of our budget could actually go to parks, how much of our budget should go to parks, you know, how do we start this conversation with the community? And so, I know it's been very diligent, we really appreciate staff's work, kind of pulling those pieces together, but it is, like you said, very kind of ad hoc, like who's knowing what and what does that count as? And so just really understanding that, has been a challenge, but I think it's very important, and I appreciate the steps that you mentioned at the beginning of, we have now allocated, even if it's a small budget, to start to understand and piece together exactly what we're spending on an annual basis for maintenance and like what our needs are. Because it's actually pretty overwhelming if you look in the draft master plan, the millions and millions of dollars based on the conditions of our parks and what we actually need to spend. So I think that's a huge first baby step in understanding where we're at. I think from there, we asked staff to evaluate like a maintenance, operations and maintenance plan and manual so that we can start to understand, you know, not only what we have been spending, but what we should be doing, and kind of memorializing that in an operations and maintenance plan. And I know Barbie spent time working on that. That's a huge first step as well, but also I would say an overwhelming one based on the condition of some of our parks. So having that plan is great, but we need the funding and the support to, and the people to make all that happen. So, and then from there, I think it's really starting to understand what this current draft plan does for us and what it doesn't do for us. And I do have some concerns about, I think it is a great and very useful inventory. I would personally like to see some additional steps so that our community is really visioning our park system and our recreation system, and not just kind of, you know, reactively making decisions as maintenance or operations come up.
And it's important, I think, to emphasize, we keep using the word draft master plan, because even though it was presented to us as a master plan, even from the very beginning as a committee, we weren't viewing it that way. We were viewing this as a, like you said, a great inventory with some significant insights into the condition of our system, but it really is not, doesn't take the next step we need to take to truly be a master plan. So that's some of the work that still has to happen along the way. The other thing I want to make sure we mention before we start taking questions is that it's been a couple of years this has been going on, and we sort of got to a slow start because we were asking questions that didn't know the answers to, and it took a lot of time to get close to those answers on what we're spending and that kind of thing. We also then had leadership changes. The city manager left, the deputy city manager left, Brady was doing what is now 4 jobs. It wasn't really until the top of the organization sort of stabilized and Christie actually stepped in and was really providing the senior leadership that we really have gotten traction in the last 8 months. And I'm feeling really good about where we're headed. I was a little frustrated before that, and I feel really good now about where we are. And we're to the point now, we're ready to solicit some community input. We weren't until now.
I would also add just really quickly before we start too, I think this is such, it's very important, the timing of this right now. I think, Christy, you mentioned, you know, we're bringing on really beautiful, impactful assets into our community, things like Walk 34 and the new Rails to Trails. We need to help staff, and our community needs to help us understand, you know, how exactly are we going to steward these community assets, and so those should be included in this bigger conversation. And these are new things that we haven't had before, and so we need to be thinking, as lovely as it is to have those things, how we fund the operations and maintenance of those things, and really visioning that out across this system with my hope, you know, a Parks and Recreation Department in the future that's really able to take an adopted master plan at some point and use that to guide the way.
And the other thing I'll mention is the data center is going to create potentially a revenue stream for us to actually invest in the park system, and be able to maintain Block 34 the way we want, be able to maintain the facilities, maintain all of these parks and do the right thing that we frankly should have been doing all along, with it was going to the resources. This is going to provide a funding avenue to make those things happen as well.
That's the goal.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you guys both so much for the work that you've put into this so far, and certainly along with staff. I would love, I've got 4 folks who have signed up to provide public comment. We're certainly open and welcome and excited to hear whatever thoughts you have about this or questions that you might have about parks and how we're going about, you know, what the next step of Parks and Recreation here in Stillwater is going to be. So if you haven't signed up, you can get a form up there, see Dawn, she'll get you signed up, but I'll start with the folks I've got in alphabetical order so far, and the first one is Kathy Burton. You could come up and just introduce yourself. I think, is it normally 3 minutes that we do for these?
And Teresa has a timer facing them.
Just so we make it through everybody.
I'm Kathy Burke. I just wanted to tell you that listening to this tonight, I really appreciate all the work that's been done so far. But for years, Parks and Recreation Parks has been neglected. And if this goes forward, I would appreciate that it would continue as much research and study that's been done, that you've looked at each park, you've looked at the needs, you've looked at those things, because there's a lot of places in town that are really rough, that are not pretty, that if people drive in, they see, you know, Boomer Park with trees and shrubs and things all over the bank. And it's not inviting. I've been able to do some traveling lately, and the communities I've been in that have, you know, you can tell that the community cares. And that's what I'd like to have Stillwater get back to, is that we care about our community, and that I would just encourage for this to continue and just not to be one study and for then it to go away for another 15 or 20 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie Couch.
Julie Couch, I live at 901 South Gray. And I want to second what the first speaker said about the neglect of the parks and recreation. This has been going on for years, and that's why you have all these issues now, especially with the swimming pool. And second, now you may have covered this, but I couldn't hear most of this. So are you forming this subcommittee that was supposed to be formed from 2 years ago?
It has been formed, and they've met several times, but they will continue to
So you have included not just the 2 counselors, but other people. It was supposed to be a citywide committee with 2 counselors involved.
I think the initial meetings were to try to get the committee organized, so we've still got a long way to go, yes.
So you
And to
haven't,
bring more people in.
you haven't gotten the,
I don't think any of those meetings have included a community.
I've never read that it was formed. And my third comment is about the swimming pool and being in negotiations with the YMCA. I heard 6 months ago, you had all decided to give this to the YMCA. So I think, I'm questioning now, are you really in negotiations? That's my,
Okay,
those are my comments.
well, I'm not sure how to respond to that. I'm not sure what you mean by what we've given anything to the YMCA.
I heard from four sources
You said it might probably
at the first of the year that this, but these are people in the city, told me the swimming pool was to be closed and the YMCA was taking over.
Well, that's not a decision that anybody's actually made. That's part of a discussion that it was ongoing.
All I'm saying, it was very evident from the people who told me that it had been made. So something, that's all I'm saying.
I appreciate that, Julie, thank you. Next, I have Roger Ghost.
Glad I signed up. Hear all this. It seems like this report's set around quite a while now, so glad to bring it back out. I think a lot of people are probably not real familiar with what was in it 2 years ago. We used to have a really good park and rec department back in the old days, like the 70s and 80s. When we built Couch Park Pool, but it seems like over time, counselors or management, somebody didn't pay attention to taking care of. Same way as the streets haven't been taken care of, different things like that. I was disappointed to hear today that dollars are coming from public works to parks, because we've just worked on the transportation tax committee to get some of that money to public works so they can fix streets, because they need more money, so moving money around. 3 employees from Park and Rec. I mean, Park and Rec's got enough land, they need to have their own thing. And does the report say which of these parks have land, water conservation funds in them? Because I can throw a wrench and get rid of things.
It's a good point, Roger. It does, I don't think it does. It's one thing that we've asked previously for staff to work on and inventory those lands within the whole community of Stillwater, so
Right.
that we understand that.
That's a
Very important part.
booger done one too. And does the report have the utilization rate of each park? However you measure that.
I can answer those what he's done with
Okay. Yeah, and I guess I was misunderstanding. I thought the pool was gonna be like 1.5 million to repair it. I guess that's full blown repair to today's standards. Maybe best just to nose it and do something. So that's it. Thank you.
Roger, I'll mention, you were asking about money being pulled out of Public Works.
Yes.
Or Parks was disbanded, that's where most of that money went. So to recreate Parks Department, we pulled the money and some of the people out of that budget.
Yeah, we have a park and rec, a public works department that's not adequately funded to take care of the streets, so. But we've got those problems everywhere. Well, no, Thank you.
So if I can answer in order, let me see how good my memory is, sir. The $125,000 that was moved was identified in the last 3 years review of the standard maintenance costs that were allocated toward public parks maintenance. And so that was something that was already coming from Public Works budget toward the parks. What we did is we moved it from that to this so we could better track funding and et cetera. So it wasn't a diminishment of their budget, it was something that was allocated previously from their budget and moved over here to capture the actual expenses differently. And the other part was, I'm going to agree with all of the middle part you said about we need staff back over here and we need the prioritization and the funding. And then the pool, they recommended that 1.5 million that you heard was the recommended, they said before, they would recommend allowing citizens to use it as it should be returned to sound working condition. And that's basically the sound working condition to cover all of their concerns and addressing. So.
Thank
Did I miss any?
Well, just the question I think about
Oh,
what
I
the,
have the LWCF piece too.
go for it.
Okay, we do have a list of the inventory for the Land Wild Conservation Fund and what caveats are put on those properties. And so we do have that when we move forward now to look at when they are, if they're recommended for liquidation in that master plan, obviously that's gonna be something that we look directly at now, so we can see those limitations or restrictions.
Teresa, I have 1 minute left. Looking at the liquidation plan or possibility, the problem is most of this land's in floodplain. And so it's not much value to be able to sell. Believe me, I've looked at all of it because developers are always coming in and wanting something. And there's Arrowhead or Tower Park, a few of those are about the only ones that have any value.
Correct.
Thank you.
And that is part of what we look at, and I'm glad that you brought that up, and that's what we talked about before, that intentional timeout, instead of just replacing a playground with a playground, is there are ways that we can lower maintenance costs and costs for, not only maintenance costs, but actually as far as staff time, but the actual replacement costs, to look at those items that aren't really liquidation level.
Sunset tennis courts were one of the places that were recommended for liquidation. And that's by Sprouts, Washington, and whatever that cross street is. If you look at those tennis courts, the drainage is horrible. It all goes downhill, so the courts collapse quickly because they have water underneath them. There's no parking. We use an alley going behind it for people to park there. There's no bathroom facilities, there's no lights. What we can see happening is the 4 new courts that we have at Couch Park, we just refurbished those to build some additional courts there. They'd be in the same location, and we can also add some pickleball courts there. We could hopefully take any money we receive from selling that land and then build these nice courts at Couch Park where we have plenty of room. We could put a nice bathroom facility there, be open year round. And I think that would make our pickleball players happy as well as our tennis players. Now, a lot of them, I know they have used the Sunset courts for years and years and years. I get that. And they love that location. Sometimes though, we need to do some drastic things to move forward. And that would probably be a very valuable piece of land for someone who wants to build housing in that area. So are we thrilled about it? No, but it's a way for us to also be able to consolidate our courts and be able to maintain and take care of them much better than what we can do right now, going from Couch to Sunset. We have great parking. It would just make a lot of sense. And I know people have sentimental attachments to things, believe me, I know. But sometimes you do have to tear things down to build things up, so. I've already had phone calls about Tower Park. I know people want to purchase it, so I know that's a valuable piece of land.
I think that brings up a really important point to maybe carry us into the next part of our conversation related to staff's questions about the adequacy of the draft master plan and kind of what, well, at least what I would like to see moving forward to help our community just make community decisions around these. So it's, I think a resource like Couch Park, or you think of some of our larger parks like Boomer. I know as we've traveled to look at some of the resources in other communities, we went and did some touring of other communities that had facilities like similar to Block 34, and we were kind of touring their park facilities as well. And you are seeing across the state some consolidation of recreational, specifically of some of the active use recreation. So things like tennis sport, complexes, ballpark complexes, they serve the community sometimes better when they're consolidated because you can have tournaments or it's kind of all in one place, and so you kind of know where to go for those things. But I think as we look at things like Couch Park with so many question marks at that specific park in particular, swimming pool, question mark, maintenance facility, question mark, tennis courts, question mark. There's also a playground there. There's also ball fields there. There's a lot that's happening, and there's also a lot of users and stakeholders in terms of the different types of sports and active recreation that's happening there. It's also a green space. We're seeing some increased numbers of unhoused people in that area. There's just a lot going on. To me, I would love to see not just a bulleted list of recommendations for Couch Park. I would like our community to have the opportunity to vision a recreational complex at Couch Park, so that the pool we get, if we get a pool, is the pool the community needs. The courts we get are what the community needs. The fields we get are what the community needs. I don't think the current version of the master plan provides that level of visioning. If the thought is, as we liquidate some facilities, that we're consolidating into other areas. So to me, that's something, and I think that goes across the board. I think as you look at Boomer, understanding that as opposed to being reactive to maintenance concerns, what's vision? Let's plan forward what those facilities need to be.
If I may piggyback onto her. Oh,
Before we do that, we do have one other person signed up to speak, so I'd like to get there. And then if anybody else has heard anything and they'd like to speak, please feel free to let Dawn know. But Jeremy Upshaw.
Thank you all for having this, first of all. This is really, really nice. One thing I joke about with everybody I know is I live at Boomer Lake. I'm the Canoe and Kayak Club president, and we're a recreational organization. We're very small right now. Any given season, me as an individual paddler, I paddle 500 to 1,000 miles on Boomer. And so as a competitive boater, that's kind of my second home. And one thing I've noticed, especially during COVID, our parks really are what connect us. This is where everybody was the last vestige that we could come together. One major thing though that I've noticed is, there's kind of that disconnect between the people and applying those resources, applying that manpower and that volunteer time with the city. And so as somebody that's very involved in the parks, one thing I wanted to do tonight was possibly leave here with some resources to take back. One thing we do is we do a volunteer cleanup. It's just, it's part of the club, but we don't have any of the resources that we could utilize through the state, through Blue Thumb, through Keep Oklahoma Beautiful. There's a lot of free stuff out there that we just need help funnel to us. And I can't clean up Couch Park, but I'm sure there's somebody at Couch Park that's there that runs an organization or a sports team or something that's willing to do the same thing. Because if you look at, the data sets, there's how many college students? 25,000 college students. They all need 40 hours of community service. They're all asking me, hey, where do I do community service? Come clean up. If I was empowered through the city to maybe get some of those community service hours funneled into the park, take some of the manpower hours out of public works, revisit that in a couple of years and see what difference that makes. We're not here to balance a budget or anything. We don't do that. We just vote. But we want to be able to give back to the parks and have a good outlet for that. So I think there's a lot of people in the community that are willing to do that, put the hours down, put the effort out. We just need that help, that connectivity, and maybe an ambassador to kind of reach out and work with some of these community ambassadors. And so I live off 10th, and my dog's going to be happy to know that Myers Park is possibly getting new turf. So yeah, but that's it. Yeah, I just appreciate it and appreciate Public Works and the PD, Lake Patrol. Been a big, help having that, at least that connection to the city. It's been really good. So
Thank you. Thanks for those comments, and thanks for the work that you and your group do to help people like me. We do have several volunteer groups, generally park users or folks who we have cyclists that use the trail system that get out and help trim trees back and take care of things. And I think that's a really good point to say that the more we can do to help empower those volunteer groups to make sure that you all are able to go out and do that work and do it well is something we should be doing. So we will follow up on that for sure. One more, Catherine Rhodes.
Thank you for having this meeting. And I just really wanted to follow up on the very last comment. There are so many of us that would love to volunteer to help with cleanup and with other things that the parks need. And I agree that it's the outside
environment that pulls the community together. And I'm so excited about Block 34, and now I'm a little anxious about how we're going to maintain it. I hadn't even thought about that. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be great. I have some relatives that are involved in the university. In fact, my daughter did a lot of cleaning as she was actually running for city council. She took people out and cleaned streets and parks, and I know that there are people that want to do that. So I would really encourage you to find a way to reach out to us. And then my last question is, I love Teal Ridge, and I didn't hear a thing about Teal Ridge. And I don't know if that's part of the city or not. It's falling apart. It's sort of dangerous to walk there, but it's a beautiful spot. So I want to put a word in for Teal Ridge.
Okay, thank you so much. Do you have comments on Teal Ridge? Teal Ridge is not part of the,
Is Jim still here?
Yes.
I'm gonna let Jim, my parks manager, because he at one time was the Parks and Rec director
Or
before.
no, that's all private.
But
The city went out and helped for a while, and we would dump trash and all that, and then, but it's all private.
so people think we still maintain it. We do still go out if there's an issue, and we may put some gravel down when they pull up. But the group, do you remember Jim, who was in charge of that group, Teal Ridge? I'm sorry, Jim.
you should have expected to get called on.
He should have. There's two former Parks and Rec directors who still work for the city, so I rely on them heavily.
So it was owned privately, and a gentleman had a hold of it and was doing some work on it, and then sadly he passed. And so I don't know what all has taken place with that. I haven't really researched into it, but it's all private. There's nothing at all the city does with that, and we haven't for a long time. I can research it a little more and find out.
It would
Who
be nice
does
if
own
we
it,
could, at least find a little bit of information we can let Ms. Ross know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If I may, can I tag team onto something,
Please.
Vice Mayor Delaski? We've had this question asked before, and I think yours was a great point when we talked about the consolidation of the tennis courts. Some people have asked, well, if you just move tennis courts from here to here, how is that helping the system? And it truly does. There's now not two locations that require separate maintenance criteria from yet a different location. It's easier to maintain when there are facilities together for a primary use, and then you have, for example, a green space at another. It doesn't require us to mow or weed eat or maintain the undersurface or the surface of another playground right next to a playground, or two separate tennis courts, and things like that. So we did want to kind of mention, that was a great point that she mentioned, that consolidation is there are wins in that, even though we're not removing an item, it's just being reallocated to another location. And then Mayor, I think you asked me earlier, what does the master plan get us? I think these are truly the questions that staff, and when Barb and I talked and we talked to her team, our goal tonight is really gonna be kind of that key of that number 3 question, potentially, is it's that funding prioritization. I think everybody sitting over here in this room tonight would love to see a parks department actually revitalized. To do so with staffing, it requires that budget. And that's really what we've been doing for the last 8 months, is looking at the budget gap. And I know that that's a big question that keeps coming up. And honestly, we can't currently identify the gap that's needed because we don't know what properties we want to maintain in what condition. And so we know that current funding and staffing is not enough, but where does that funding come from is truly a prioritization need when we look at things. The master plan, we believe helps us as a guide path or a footprint. It's not ideal, and we completely agree with the counselors' concerns that have been already voiced. It doesn't give us that visioning piece. Our goal in this is to have that prioritization kind of answered as we go through this next budget cycle, while we continue to evaluate what budget needs and gaps are doing. That $125,000 we mentioned, that's maintaining them in their current condition. And if something needs replaced, it's not in the budget. And so that's why we wanted to take that real deliberate step like we're doing with Arrowhead and say, we want the community to be aware that we are kind of in a time of pause and reflection, and that if you see a change in the park system, fill out that survey, take a look, get your information into us, and let us take a time out to see the prioritization of the funding, the allocation of the resources, and really what is the best utilization for that space, because that's gonna drive where we envision the park system moving forward. When we know how the community is using those spaces, the frequency of utilization and the cost that they are in their current state and can be in a changed state.
Yeah, I think my concern right now is for staff not to have a master plan that includes that vision. My worry is that we could, in an ad hoc way, make missteps for the wider community. I'm very concerned about equity and, right, if we don't have a wider vision and we're just doing it on a park by park or space by space basis, how are we tracking a wider understanding of making sure that it's, not all parks on this part of town, or parks that serve, this type of user, or, so while we must address safety immediately and react to that, my concern about kind of a more ad hoc approach, which I feel like our current master plan it is that bulleted list of kind of an ad hoc approach, doesn't really ensure that our end result across the community will be equitable and serve our entire community.
So a comment about that though, are there not a few things that really we can go ahead and do now that we maybe need to do now?
I think that Arrowhead was a really great example. The park playground equipment was unsafe. It needed to come out.
Yeah, and so I'm not a fan of let's put everything on hold till we plan. I'm a fan of let's figure out some things that need to be done now that are important now. Let's try to go ahead and get them worked out. And then while we're working on the vision sort of plan, and the vision plan, I mean, we're looking 3 or 4 years down the road. If we get the data center, there's going to be some funds out of that can help us too, that could go into the vision plan. So I do think we need to take some action with some things that are out there right now.
And I think staff is doing those things, for example, at Arrowhead Park. As things are identified that are urgent, need to be done, they're taken care of.
I think somebody mentioned earlier today, and so our parks are one of the most public facing community assets that we have. And so being proud of those spaces, and also the way that they attract visitors and guests, whether it's through tournaments or play space or even users. We haven't really even talked about some of the things like our community center and things like the senior center and things like Block 34 when it gets here. These are things that bring people to our community, get them to spend dollars in our community, stay in our community. They're important in that way to the city in realizing sales tax dollars as well. So as we look at prioritizing, I keep staring at that third question, right? Where do those funds come from? I think it's just time for us to start having this conversation with the community.
Well, I think it also is a recruitment tool for people looking to move to Stillwater or for businesses looking at Stillwater. And especially the kind of youth-focused services that we can provide as families would be coming to Stillwater.
Yeah, and I think having looked at this master plan document I don't think it's the right title for this, but the master plan document that we have is really, and honestly, I think this is kind of what we asked for, which was, what do we do with the current condition of what we've got, which is we don't have a lot of money budgeted, we have very little money budgeted to park, certainly improvement, but barely any for maintenance. And so to me, this was a plan of, this is what you've got right now. If nothing really changes, what should we be doing, right? And so these questions about liquidation and consolidation, saying, unless you're going to start sinking significant funding into your park plans, you know, your only options are, try to liquidate some, try to consolidate some, try to, you know, plant flowers where you don't have to mow, you know, that sort of thing. And so, and I do think there's some value in that, given that we, while there are some potentials for new funding out there on the horizon, right now, we don't, you know, Christy can tell us, there's not exactly a surplus of funds in the budget sitting around waiting for community needs like this to use them. We have way more needs in the capital plan than we have funds for the capital plan. So I do think there's a mix, sort of what Councilor Hardin was saying. There's some things here within this plan that can probably go ahead and we can push forward on and give staff some guidance of, we do need to accomplish a couple of these things, because if whatever funding we're hoping to get in the future doesn't materialize, we're still gonna have to do something with what we've got right now. And then I think if we can, you know, we are working towards community development, economic development projects. The data center is one of those that hopefully can provide some new funding that then can be dedicated. In fact, that plan does call for it to be dedicated to community spaces, that we would then be able to say, okay, now that this is available, we can then push for how, you know, before we spend a single penny of that money, we would want to spend it in accordance with, okay, what's this going to do for us over the next 5-10 years, rather than just throw it at the biggest priority we see right now. So I think we're going to have to figure out, and this, as you said at the beginning, this meeting is not for deciding exactly what that's going to look like, but I think what we need to do is come back to council with an action plan of, here are, you know, 5 or 6 things that can be done now, need to be done now. We need to prioritize now whether there's new funding available or not. And then also in conjunction with that, say, okay, assuming that we're gonna have X number of dollars that we can put towards real park planning and real park vision and real park improvement over the next several years, then let's come up with a plan that actually gets us that, because this isn't that plan at all. So there's a combination here of these things that I think need to happen together, you know, at this point.
I think the current master plan has the beginnings of what a vision plan would have. You always have to evaluate existing conditions before you start planning for new conditions or changes. So I think it documents very well. I'm very satisfied with the way it documents, and I do see the value. I'm sure Barb, you look at it all the time, right? To have an inventory of each one of our park spaces, and to understand, you know, a little bit what the challenges in terms of maintenance are at each of those spaces. The current plan has that inventory, I think, very well, and I think, you know, getting started on a more visioned master plan would include that piece anyway. So we kind of have a part of that existing conditions piece already. It's really just, from my perspective, making sure that, you know, we don't think we know what people want and start building things out and start building ourselves out of, you know, what could be if we really took a moment to start doing that. And certainly before we start, you know, changing resources substantively other than to take care of them, right? One of the other things that one of our speakers mentioned that I just wanted to maybe ask staff to follow up on. I know that we have an inventory of the land and conservation funded property, but I also know that things like senior centers and senior centers kitchens are often also funded with Title III funds, I believe, and I know that those are also restricted, and so any shifts with the senior center and things like that would require an understanding of how those were funded, to make sure that we're not changing anything there. I guess I would just ask for that, saying I'm not aware, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but anything that's specially funded, like the senior center is something that comes to mind, those land and water conservation funds come to mind. But certainly these are types of spaces where we often get donations from people, and I don't know if there's restrictions on those, and I'm not certain that was evaluated.
Yeah, there's no restrictions on the senior center. That was not built with any funds that would require us to,
Even the kitchen?
yes.
to the city?
Yeah, and we don't serve complete meals there, we just do snacks, and that's why we've talked about moving the senior center into this facility, where at Project Heart, they serve hot meals every day, so it just makes a lot of sense for us to be able to consolidate those services.
I know when you start, it's a sensitive population in our
Yes.
community, and we wanna make sure we're serving them well. I had the opportunity to visit the senior center in Ada, a few months back, and it was a bond-funded, senior center that was just remarkable and beautiful and had amazing kitchen and STEM lab for seniors and a 3D printer, and they do exercise. I mean, it was just this, like, I wanna go, I wanna be a senior so that I can go there, so,
Don't rush it.
But yes,
But it's great to see those resources in other communities and think and kind of, you know, what could those types of things be?
Right.
and part of our conversation has been exactly what you just referenced. I'm glad that you brought that up. What are the restrictions? You know, we're gathering the list. We've got those funds already. We are gathering what other items would maybe put a stopgap on a plan or have to be determined further. And like she mentioned, we did look, that was part of that one slide about 2024 actions. We have spoken about the senior center because we've got staff at 2 locations, both providing programming. There are some definite wins to having it here, especially with Block 34 coming on, that invites to a whole nother avenue of programming for those. And so I do want everybody to realize that we're being very intentional in kind of this timeout period as we talk about that envisioning and not making those rush decisions. Our greatest fear is to make a decision that's harmful to the park system. And so our goal is truly that intentional timeout as we look toward what that comprehensive plan may be for our park system. What steps take us in the right direction for the community? And when we talk about potential consolidation, we look at, is it making it better than current? What do they gain by having a separate facility that they may not gain here by having more staff, more programming, a new access point of Block 34. We've talked to the library about some programming on Block 34 that our seniors would be into, you know, the warm meals. And so we really are taking all of the considerations to look at increasing those assets, usability to those citizens.
I saw Megan from Prairie Arts here, they're talking about programming, coming in and doing some art programming. Stephanie would love to have them here in a facility. They would have access to the farmer's market. They could walk down there Wednesdays. Block 34, the library. I mean, this is.
Well, as to specific issues like this one, I mean, I think those are kinds of questions that I think, you know, we need to start, I think staff probably needs to come up with, hey, we think these are some of the high priority things that can be done now that help alleviate some of the problems, that kind of bring some of this action part of the draft plan, you know, push that forward, and that council can then look at it and say, okay, you know, this is what we do think, you know, we agree or we don't agree, and the public has a chance to comment on some of those specific actions that maybe need to happen, or that staff feels need to happen, you know, more quickly than, you know, when we actually have additional funding to do some you know, some bigger planning or some bigger improvements. I just want to add briefly that I think you mentioned, you know, the public survey that went into this master plan was one of our, if not our top response public survey, and you know, 700 some people doesn't sound like a lot. It isn't a lot. Compared to the amount of feedback we normally get, it's a lot. I mean, it just is, and I know that's sad, and it's something that we all lament. But to say that, you know, our comprehensive plan has only got, you know, 500 some responses to this point. A whole lot of things we do. The fact that I didn't really count, but 20 some people. This is the biggest crowd we've had at a council meeting in quite some time. The idea that, you know, to me, that demonstrates that parks and recreation and our public amenities and public facilities in this community are very important to this community. I think there's I think the council feels the same. I don't think there's anybody sitting on this council who goes, you know, whatever, we don't really care what what those look like. We want to make those improvements. Like everything else we deal with, it's a question of resources and where do we find that funding. Mr. Goes mentioned the fact that we got to spend money on streets too. 25% of our sales tax income is dedicated to streets. 0% of it is dedicated to parks. We have to make those decisions as a council together to figure out, and as a community through the council, to figure out where to dedicate that money and put it towards these kinds of projects, because there's not currently a mandate that makes us do that. I will just say, you mentioned that the senior center that you toured in Ada was a bond-funded project. I don't like paying taxes more than anybody, or as much as anybody doesn't like paying taxes. But if you look at these facilities, if you look at what is done in communities with parks, they are funded through taxpayer voted and funded sources that people come and say, this is something we want to pay for. And we're going to have to figure out ways in this community to make sure that we're willing to put our money where our mouth is and say we want these kinds of facilities, and we've got to figure out a way to fund them. We passed a bond to fund the fire station for the first time in 20 years. It was the first bond this community's passed in 20 years. We've had opportunities to fund recreation bonds in this community over the last 25 years, and we haven't done it. That's partly on the council and leadership to figure out plans to make this thing worthwhile, whether it's a swimming pool sort of a thing, or we say, hey, is it worth everybody paying $50 or $100 a year to make sure we have a great pool here for the next 20 years, 25 years? Those are the kinds of things we've got to be able to plan for, we've got to put in front of people, and people have got to be willing to fund if we want to have this stuff. I don't know how the pool was funded in 1975 when we built the last one. Probably not a bond, but. So all that to say, there are very difficult decisions to be made at very difficult places to try to figure out where do we get the funding that we need to make this park system what we think Stillwater deserves, what I think we know Stillwater deserves to be better. I do think there are some possibilities moving forward of those action plans and stuff that we've talked a little bit about tonight. I think it's, again, on the community to keep our feet to the fire. Come back and say, hey, you guys actually do have to be doing this. Some of you have been, for sure. Julie, we appreciate you being here. We appreciate the fact that you have been one of the voices that have made sure that we continue to have this conversation. There's a long way to go. This conversation is just the beginning of that. And there's more conversations to be had, I suppose, but I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I think there's hopefully some opportunities for the staff to recommend some action, and then some opportunities for us to keep pushing forward on finding some funding so that we can push for more true improvement in the system and not just the stopgap stuff that we've been dealing with.
Something I wanted to mention about the draft master plan. The vice mayor and I had this conversation with staff. We need to keep in mind this is a snapshot of time, and it's a 2-year-old snapshot. Some things maybe have improved a little bit, but I think it's more likely we've seen more deterioration. And so as Barb is dragging this out, looking at every week, I hope you're making notes on your copy of things that have been fixed, things that we now know about, we didn't know about before, because you sort of have the master of the draft master plans.
What else can we talk about for you all from staff perspective?
I think our request at this time is just kind of 2024 has been a big change for parks. We appreciate Vice Mayor Jalowski and Councilor Clark devoting several meetings and a lot of time to this conversation. I'd like to point out again, we had 57 answers to an Arrowhead Park signed and neighborhood survey. So we have a lot of vested individuals in this community that I think shows. So staff's request at this time, I know you can't take action tonight, but as we move forward, our ask would just be that we do believe that this master plan is an inventory, to adopt it as an inventory with guidelines, that it is not the firm direction. It is an adopted document that we all agree that 2-year mark was a resource in time. give us some time to continue with citizen input and allow the subcommittee to continue working on prioritization of next steps. Is my time up? To give us some time to work with the community and for the community to understand, if you see a playground structure come down or a tennis court come down, it's because we're in an intentional pause. And there's probably a sign in that park asking you to complete a survey and to give us that intentional pause while we look at the visioning, while we look at funding for a visioning plan, and then ensuring that we can have the funding to make that vision plan move forward and not just have in 4 years have a conversation again about what we wish we had done. And so we kind of need to, we're juggling all those balls and it's chicken and egg of what can come first, funding or visioning and visioning or funding. And so I think we're just asking for some more of that. I think we need to have some hard conversations coming toward council meetings with some recommendations coming out of that subcommittee from our council and staff. We need to look at when we have asked for some community assets in those public-private partnerships, that we truly look at where that funding could go into potentially the park system. Is that a better allocation for those community funds? And for our community to just understand, we are a work in progress right now. We understand our hearts are here and we just have to figure out that path forward. And so to give a little bit of grace to us as we move forward with that, our parks may not look the same, but our goal is to make them look better.
We do have one other community member who would like to make a comment while we're here, so Aaron Jacoby.
Okay, you pronounced it right. Thank you for having this.
Let me get that mic down for you.
How's that? Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for having this meeting. Learned a lot from all you said. I would just like to put a note for y'all when you're planning long term, and prioritizing like what areas and what activities go where, that you think about disabled folks. And like, are these places close, these bringing places close to a bus stop? What is the sidewalk maintenance on this corner, to this parking spot? And just, I know you can balance a lot of things and a lot of factors and a lot of different groups of people that all need these spaces, but you just have a note on there that, check and make sure you're thinking of folks like me. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, I think that, Vice Mayor, goes to your comments about the concern about equity as we move forward with these plans, to make sure that we're ensuring that these spaces are available and can be utilized by every member of our community.
I think accessibility is something kind of near and dear to my heart. As we worked on Strickland Park, that was something that inclusivity and accessibility is something so important. And it's honestly, I think it's an opportunity for us as we evaluate these spaces, not just from their conditions, from an operations and maintenance perspective. We should be layering in opportunities to enhance accessibility and inclusivity as well.
One other thing that just popped to my mind as we were talking about revenue streams, and this would not be a huge, as we were talking about revenue streams, this would not be a huge revenue stream, but several years ago when we increased the lodging tax, part of that revenue that was coming back to the city was to go towards tourism visitor type services or facilities. And I don't know how much that generates. I was thinking it was $200,000 or $300,000 a year at the time, but I also don't know what that has been going to. So maybe looking at that going forward and what that revenue goes to, and if any of that could be carved out for Park and Rec.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that, I don't know that we've really spent any of that so far. I think the conversation, part of the conversation has been, we have a committee that's helping advise on where that money goes, and part of their discussion, I know, has been using it towards facilities, sports facilities and recreation facilities, and so, but that, I think, goes to Vice Mayor's comments about, making sure we've got a bigger picture that all fits in before we start, spending money in one spot and not having it fit into a bigger picture, so.
It might be worth just mentioning just the cost estimate, just for scale. The cost estimates that were mentioned in the draft master plan, based on the conditions of the park space and how they prioritize with high, medium, and low. There were over $8 million worth of improvements or maintenance that needed to be completed or was estimated at a high priority level, $7 million at the medium priority, and $2 million at the low priority, so just $17 million roughly. Just from an operations and maintenance perspective, those estimates did not include things that the community maybe mentioned that they wanted, like a sports complex at $10 million, a new aquatic facility at $15 million, and a Sanborn Park Nature Center was at $1 million. It's so important, I think, for us to realize as council and staff, just the scale of needs with all of these acres and all of these amenities, and for our community to understand that as well. It's really challenging to make a dent in those 7-figure numbers with, 5-figure amounts, so.
And really to not just one time fix those things that need to be fixed, but to actually put a system in place that keeps us out of being in this situation. We're in the place we're in because we have not dedicated money to it for several years, decades. We can come by one time, go through and fix $8 million worth of stuff maybe, but we've got to have a plan in place to keep that going forward. So there are, again, there's the short-term stuff that we can go through and we can get done, but then there's also the longer-term stuff, which is more than just what do we spend money on. It's how we put a plan in place and how we put a system in place that's actually maintainable and that keeps the community in good shape for the coming decades.
Just with regard to your question, Christy, about the plan, the master plan, and kind of, I do have some concerns about memorializing the entirety of the current draft plan, just because it does include recommendations to implementation that I don't feel comfortable, and again, kind of that bulleted list of things. I would welcome staff's evaluation to kind of, if possible, pare out those implementation pieces, but maintain, like the operations and maintenance and the inventory components, and obviously the background and things like that. I just think there's some pieces where, mention a specific liquidation of specific things, I don't personally feel like we're quite ready to make those decisions yet, and would really value our community's thoughts before we make those types of large decisions.
We are absolutely on the same page. Our request, if this were, Barbara and I spoke, if this were to be adopted, it would be adopted as a guideline. So some of those inventory components, some of the statistics adopted, with allowing staff to continue community input, not only in the Arrowhead kind of trial balloon, but evolving that to larger community outreach, because we feel like it was a very successful test case with a lot of response generated that is we able to duplicate across not only our individual parks, but our park system. So we also do not want it adopted where it is a must invoke every principle in it. We see it as more of a guideline, and this conversation has been extremely beneficial. We just need that next step in the community to give those intentional review with us.
It would help, to Ms. Couch's point earlier, it would help if we, as part of that, have maybe a plan or some kind of, how are we going to, whether it's through the subcommittee or through something else that says, how are we gonna get that community input on those pieces that we need? Is it gonna be through more meetings like this? Is it gonna be, it would be nice to have at least a draft of what that community, how that community input will be sought.
We have a couple of different ideas. I think this was the launching pad that we needed to move the conversation forward and present that subcommittee with some guidance and direction of prioritization and movement forward.
I don't want to speak for you, Councilor Clark, but I think, I would certainly welcome at this point, now that we kind of have a little bit more our bearings. I would welcome, community member participation in that subcommittee, now that I feel like we can kind of confidently say we kind of know what's going on and, are starting to make some more, decisions within that committee.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I said earlier about, we were laying the groundwork, and now I feel like we're ready for some community input, and I completely agree with you.
Councilors, further comments? Anything else from staff? All right, well, again, thank you so much to the community members who were here, and for your continued involvement in this conversation. It is a continuing conversation. It's good to get kind of off the sort of high center we've been on for a little bit here the last year and a half or so, and looking forward to seeing the progress that we can make from here. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Mayor Joyce,
Yes?
Vice Mayor Jablowski,
Yes.
Councilor Hawkins. Yes. Councilor Clark,
Yes.
Councilor Harden,
Yes.
meeting is adjourned with a vote of 5-0.
Thank you all for coming.